Okay, so this is going to be a run through on the choices that you have really with simple online assessment. Now this can apply to exams or coursework, and sometimes it can be confusing which one to choose, which one's most appropriate, which ones you can do and which ones you can't do, and where you have control as an academic. There's a number of processes that over the years we have become reliant on, partly because they needed to be centrally created because of feeds places, and partially because we had no other options. And of course that's changed over the years, and as we change to more of an online assessment environment, it's important to know the distinction, but more importantly to know that you have choice in how you go about conducting assessments. Remember, it's supposed to be driven by the pedagogy, by the learning, the teaching and the experience and the authenticity with the tools enabling it. It is not supposed to be driven by the platform and the restrictions of the tools on offer. But within the toolbox that we do have, here are a couple of ways that you can go about things in the simplest ways to think of them. So this is my test module, and in this tests and quizzes area, which is really just a content area that I've made, in here I've got a range of assessments. Now I'm only showing you this here because it is a content area and it is a space that you can put anything. A content area is where you put files. It's unfortunately how Blackboard has become thought to be simply a file dumping ground, but a content area is a workspace. That's the way that I tend to think of it. You've got build for adding particular files and items, web links for linking OneDrive files from your PowerPoints so that they're live documents that you can change rather than attaching files and uploading to the content collection, that sort of thing. But you can also put in assessments, tool links, and some of the partner content. And tool links can be quite handy for things like Panopto video links. What I'm going to show you today is assessments. Now, the way that we think as academics is that a full Blackboard submission is controlled by SAT, it is made by SAT, and it is determined how we use it by SAT and other central services, as largely it's just facilitated by particular teams, not particularly determined by. But actually, every time you have an assignment appear in your course menu for students, that is the point that they submit their work, all that is an assignment from the tools here in a content area. In the case of those that appear in your content area over here, your course menu, they are simply those that have been created by the SAT team based on information provided to them by you, the module leader, in the assessment data checker. And this is normally coursework, full Blackboard submission, which means that it is a submission area for a file created by a central team, such that when you finish the marking process and close it, there is a feed directly to ISIS, to the student record system. And that's what's used for field boards. But what's worth bearing in mind is actually, provided students can see their marks, nothing really needs to go to the student record system until shortly before a field board. It's there for quality assurance and really auditing time points. But because we are shifting now, there's a paradigm shift in how we do online assessment and online learning, and the inclusion really of more formative assessments to help students along the way. That single time point of fixed marks that cannot be changed without manual intervention being sent to the student record system where they are effectively locked in is no longer strictly necessary except for that quality assurance process. And so you still need to do it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be at the point where you finish doing the marking. So a coursework is largely an assignment, and we'll go into this very briefly just to show you how you can make it yourself. This is really the process that a SAT team member would have to go through to do it for you based on the assessment data checker. You give it a name such as coursework 1. You type in the information, the brief for the students, the things about what format to use. You can paste in the standard text from those normal assignment submissions created centrally about you are guaranteeing the work is your own as a student and that you understand the submission rules and what the word counts are, all that sort of stuff. Any files associated with it, this could be rubrics, it could be marking schemes, it could be handouts and PDFs and things that they might want. By assigning a due date, that gives it a presence in the course calendar. Now that's a separate video that you can find talking about course calendars, but any assessment that you create that has a due date will appear in the course calendar so that students can see it. And that's something to investigate and something that we should be using more of. Marking points, always best to do 100, simply because it's easier to work with percentages even if they're represented as scores. You can then work through the various options here and choose individual submissions, group or portfolios. It's usually a good idea with a piece of coursework to do unlimited attempts because you want them to upload it as many times as they want until the due date. Score attempts using the last marked attempt, which means if you're working through the marking tool, the one that you see as the marker, the one that you've been assigned, is the one that they put up last. It is therefore the student's responsibility to put up the work that they are happy to be marked as the last thing, not to accidentally put up a draft after the fact. Whenever you're doing an assignment, best to check submissions automatically using Safe Assign. And then you can work through as to whether to do anonymous or delegated. It's really best to leave these open for the most part. It gives you a lot more control. These are all fine to do. You want to have a score. Don't change it to percentage because it shows it as an actual percentage. It makes it harder to extract it and use it elsewhere. And then give it availability. Now, if you want it to appear in the calendar, then you have it as a due date. It will then appear also as a to-do item in your homepage of Blackboard. But really, the due date is providing a deadline by which after that point they can't submit. Now, because we don't have a 24-hour late submission window anymore, we don't need to have the due date in place so that after that time they can still submit within 24 hours but are marked late. We're no longer worried about that because we don't have the 24-hour late submission window because we no longer have capped resets. So really what you want to do is give it a time where they'll be able to see it and a time where it will disappear, because of course they can't submit something somewhere they can no longer see. And then you do submit. Now I've just created a piece of coursework. If I'm now a student, I would go in and it would give me all the normal view that there is. I can add comments saying this is the work to be marked by this person, or I've chosen this particular system or topic, whatever it might be. You can write the submission or attach the file there. It's just as you see it normally. Now this kind of thing you can mark through the marking tool. You don't have to have a SAT team create something for you. Now here are all the marking ways. If you have done a full Blackboard submission, you will have to use the marking management. If it is one that the SAT team has created, it will appear here. If it's one that you've created, you tick the manually created assignments box, and when it's closed, when the due date has been, when the visibility is gone, and in this case it is usually a good idea to give it a due date, particularly for the calendar feed, it will then appear here and you can assign it to markers just the same as normal. The only difference here is that it doesn't have an automatic feed into ISIS. Now this isn't a problem because actually what I advise for most marking is grade column mapping. Now you have to have asked for it. You have to go into the assessment data checker or specifically ask the SAT team to set your assignments to be that. But I strongly encourage, particularly now that we have online exams as well as online coursework, to do grade column mapping. What grade column mapping is, if you had it set up, you go into it and you can choose any column from Grade Center, and there will be a box that has been created for you that will say that a particular assignment, the one that ISIS is expecting, is CW1. So if there would be component B, CW1, I would then choose, in this case, I would choose coursework 1 from a drop-down list of all the Grade Center columns. So here are all the various tests and things I've made in here just for fun. You can see coursework 1. So in grade column mapping, I would simply go to marking, grade column mapping, and I would be shown coursework component B, coursework 1 is what ISIS is going to call it, and that's what will be reported. I would then have a space over here with all the columns available from Grade Center, and I would simply choose the one that's called coursework 1. That one is then the one that would be fed to ISIS, and that's what would appear on the field board reports. And that's a nice simple way of doing it. If you do it for exams, you can enter the marks right into the box. So if you have online exams, such as we've got here, IND-based January exam, I can put the mark in there for my preview student, give me 50%, and then do grade column mapping. And for exam 1 that ISIS is expecting, I would simply choose that column. and it would report that mark and any others to ISIS. As I understand it, that is a manual process for the SAT team to do, so it doesn't automatically go to ISIS, but the SAT team are notified that there is a column to port into. The importance of this compared to manual marking, compared to spreadsheet marking, the old way where you'd send an Excel spreadsheet that was different from person to person, is that the SAT team had to individually put in each and every mark to each and every student. This is why we now have great column mapping. You're able to say, this is the column that I want copied into ISIS, job done. It's a brilliant tool, and you should really use it for coursework and exams across the board, because it gives you a lot more control as to when the marks go into the official feed. You can still show the marks to the students in their MyUE grades simply by making the column hidden from the students or not. They'll be able to see it in their My Grades. But it means that you can modify the grades after the fact if you erroneously put one in the wrong way round, if there was some moderation that was missed, something like that. You can edit it there without having to do a manual intervention in Grade Center through the SAT team. So that is doing coursework. The same thing applies really to exams. In this case, you can either create an assignment and do a file in upload, or you can have a text input like in a normal coursework assignment. The marking process is going to be much the same, except you'll be using the online marking tool. If, however, you build a test and you set your exam as a test, and I've got a range here that I've already built, so you can choose them from previously existing ones. If you build it as a test, the marking is a little different because you don't use the online marking tool. So in this one, we have an exam to be done, and you can complete the answers. They might be text input, they might be file upload, that sort of thing. The difference being that it doesn't use the online marking tool to distribute who does the marking and who does the moderation and that sort of thing. You can mark it through the Grade Center. So once the exam has finished, you go to Grade Center, you can narrow it down by tests. And I do have a separate video on this as to how to do marking of tests, but in the case of building a test, you go to the column and you can either click on an individual, click on their most recent attempt or the last attempt they did, and you can mark it there and put in the points, and do watch my video on that. Or you can mark all of them working through, or indeed you can mark specific questions if the exam has been set up in such a way that multiple people need to mark every student's submission, but only a specific question within that. And so that's really the way that you do it. Now, again, here, it doesn't have a direct feed to ISIS. So once all the marks are in there, you do grade column mapping just the way that you would do for coursework. So really that is the division. It's deciding whether your assessment, be it coursework or exam, is best suited to a coursework-like long text input or file upload, or whether it's best suited to a Blackboard test, in which case you can have the same things of long text input and file upload, but you can also do multiple choice and matching pairs and media input and watching videos and all kinds of things like that. It's far more expansive, it's far more inclusive. The other thing with a Blackboard test is that you have greater control over whether there is a time limit, whether there is a forced submission, whether you will do multiple attempts, that sort of thing. You can't run it automatically through SafeAssign, but you can manually run submission through SafeAssign after the fact, which again is in another video that I encourage you to watch. That's how we go thinking about assessment design. There are two tools here that we have, and they have a lot more adaptability than I think we give them credit for. But it doesn't mean that you should be limited to assessing by these two ways. This is simply a way of best using the tools we have available for a range of assessment purposes. I hope you found that useful.